Thank you. U.S. China academic relations has a long, very, very important history. And I want to state very clearly at the outset, it has been profoundly in the American interest as well as in China's interest. I'm going to be saying a lot of things today that may cast doubt on that, but I'll keep on coming back to it. And again, the reasons that America's wanted to be involved with China are many, but I want to read you a quote about the importance of working with China, and especially the importance from America's point of view of working with Chinese students and scholars. And this is the quote: "China is upon the verge of a revolution. Every great nation in the world will inevitably be drawn into more or less intimate relations with this gigantic development. The nation which succeeds in educating the young Chinese of the present generation will be the nation which, for a given expenditure of effort, will reap the largest possible returns in moral, intellectual, and commercial influence." That quote is from Edmund James, president of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, 1906. So this goes way back. This could easily have been given almost any times in the past 40 years, during which the U.S.-China relationship has been complex. It has been both competitive and cooperative, what the Chinese call 经合关系, which means competitive and cooperative relations. It's a great word. We don't have this word in English. It's been complex, but because engagement has been the background of the relationship, we have focused on our co-evolution. The basic idea of engagement is that our joint hopes are greater than our joint fears, and therefore we can progress together. So that during our exchanges of the past 40 years, and especially our higher educational exchanges, and especially through the flow of Chinese students and scholars to the United States, both nations have benefited greatly. It's been a mutual benefit. But the relationship has now shifted fundamentally. And it's done so quite rapidly, It has, the seeds of it were planted long ago. You've sort of seen it coming, but the fundamental reframing of the relationship happened relatively quickly. And I think it is now agreed upon in Beijing and in Washington that this relationship is fundamentally contentious. Competitive, if you like, but I prefer the word contentious because distrust is so deep and there is so much at stake. Now, it's hard to know how to define this for a number of reasons, one of which is that in Chinese, there aren't as many gradations of competition. We have competition, rivalry, adversity, contentious relations. In Chinese, you go more from competition to something like enemies right away without as much gradation. There's one really good word called 对手, and if somebody's your 对手, they're sort of your opponent, but they're your opponent the way that ping pong players are opponents, in that their cooperation is essential to their competition. If they don't agree to play ping pong and agree on the rules, they can't be opponents. So it's founded in a friendly way. So China and America now, we're not just 对手. It is agreed in Beijing and Washington, I think, that China has now risen and is in many regards a peer competitor of the United States. There are indices of power in which the United States clearly leads, but there are a growing number of indices in which China leads, and China, generally speaking, likes the trend lines. There's a strong sense that China's long-awaited modern day in the sun has finally come. And just to make it clear, that's not nefarious on China's part. Of course they feel that way. Of course China seeks what it calls comprehensive national power. And this is something that the Chinese leadership is very clear about. We want to build our comprehensive national power. What do they mean by that? They mean what we've got. China has looked at, has studied, has in many ways felt subject to American power that is not only military, but in the economic sphere, in what China calls the discursive sphere, the ability to tell America's story. In the soft power or cultural sphere, China has, I say, studied it and felt subject to it for a long time. And the Chinese view is that they would like to try that on for size, that would fit the modern kingdom, Middle Kingdom pretty well. And again, I don't say that with any moral prejudice. It is natural that China would seek this. It would be surprising if it didn't. It becomes an issue when the interests of the two nations grind up against each other. You know, the old saying is, your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. And from the point of view of academia, while your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins, my vigilance begins when I see you clench your fist. So we're deeply distrustful of each other. We are now involved in a global competition, the U.S. and China, to be the leading nation in shaping security architectures, trade and investment regimes, very importantly, the development and regulation of technology, norms and practices, and value systems worldwide. And this becomes clearer with every passing week if you're reading the international page of newspapers. For universities, the most important part of this new competition is that Beijing and Washington agree that henceforth the key to military power, and military power is a big part of this. We are probably looking at, with China, a new arms race. Very expensive, unaffordable, wasteful, and immoral, but I think it's coming, that comprises nukes, cyber, and the weaponization of outer space. So military is a big part of this. The key to military power, economic power, soft power or cultural power, as well as our ability to shape the global rules, both sides agree, is founded in innovation and tech. The nation which most rapidly develops, defines, and sells, AI in particular, but 5G, the Internet of Things, quantum technologies, nanotechnologies, electronic vehicles, clean energy sources. This is going to be the preeminent nation looking forward. And Beijing and Washington agree on this. It's the focus on tech, that is creating a big issue for American universities. And again, I apologize to those of you who heard this before, but if saying it twice helps it to drill down, that's good, because it's true, and it's going to remain true, I think, for decades, and it's going to pose challenges to all of you. I need a drink of water. Sorry. This is why the 2017 National Security Strategy put out by the Trump administration said several things, and these were big changes. They said China is America's greatest long-term strategic challenge. This is undoubtedly true. And Beijing agrees. Beijing in its diplomacy is far more polite. But China decided decades ago that America was the greatest obstacle to the achievement of its strategic goals, which is a nicer way of saying the same thing, that it's the greatest security challenge. And it also said, the National Security Strategy said, that American colleges and universities have become important vectors for the loss of strategically important information to China. A few quotes from the National Security Strategy. Technologies that are part of most weapons systems often originate in diverse businesses as well as in universities and colleges. Losing our innovation and technological edge would have far-reaching negative implications for American prosperity and power. Part of China's military modernization and economic expansion is due to its access to the U.S. innovation economy, including America's world-class universities. Now, the concern here is not just with espionage. If it were just about intellectual property theft and espionage, we could handle that within existing frameworks. This is also expressing a concern that the mainstream research and teaching activities of American universities undermine American security. Again, because it's a quest for comprehensive national power. And there are many examples of this. Both countries, as I said, want to lead on the Internet of Things, of nanotechnologies, of things like the application of CRISPR technologies, but also weapons like super fast submarines and like hypersonic glide reentry vehicles, which are a new way of delivering multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads to each other's territory, to each other's cities. And unlike intercontinental ballistic missiles, which enter on a predictable ballistic trajectory, hypersonic glide reentry vehicles can be reprogrammed to dodge and swerve. And therefore, because they come in very fast, can dodge any anti-missile defense system. We are competing with China to develop these very nasty machines. And so the argument from defense is, why should any Chinese physicists be getting PhDs in aeronautics or astronautics in the United States? That's the nature of the argument. But of course, it also applies to the basic sciences, because the key breakthrough technologies could come out of the basic sciences. And this is why universities are in the spotlight. So what I want to do in the remaining time is tell you the worries Washington has about China, and then talk about a few of the possible remedies. So I'm going to give you what we call a rap sheet, the different things of which China is accused of doing. I'm not saying that all these things are necessarily true or that they're true in the same degree. I'm telling you what Washington is focused on. Okay? So one is, I've already mentioned, why do we train Chinese scholars in American STEM fields if they're going to go back to China and strengthen its innovation system, its industrial capacity, and therefore its comprehensive national power, which we now see as coming to some degree at our expense? And this is, think of the Cold War. And I'm not saying that we're in a new Cold War yet, but during the Cold War, UC Boulder, no university thought we should be giving Soviet physicists PhDs in nuclear technology. The question didn't come up because the nature of the Cold War, of U.S.-Soviet competition and rivalry, was broadly understood, and it was socialized around the country, and it was socialized in universities. The challenge from China is now, I think, understood in a bipartisan way. This isn't Trump. We would be in the same place with President Clinton. It's understood in a bipartisan way in Washington, but it hasn't been socialized throughout the United States. And in a way, this is a good thing, because Washington isn't always right? So people throughout the United States are not as security focused, and they focus more on the fantastic contribution that Chinese Americans make to the United States. You're focused on the fact that Chinese Americans, Chinese students and scholars are your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, your co-parishioners, the parents of your kids' soccer teammates, whatever it may be. And there's sometimes more awareness of this outside of Washington than within. So this needs to be a dialogue of people who are more concerned about security and people who have broader points of view. But it's the China challenge, because it hasn't been socialized yet, it's hard for universities to respond to. Washington is also concerned that many universities have admitted enormous numbers of PRC students, especially undergraduates, since the American financial crisis, because there was a need for a new source of full out-of-state tuition-paying undergraduates. And the critique here is that these large numbers of Chinese undergraduates have all grown up since the Tiananmen massacre in 1989 in a highly politicized and propagandized educational system, what's called guoxue in Chinese, or national studies, which does not train people in critical thinking, which is geared toward building up state power. What does it mean, this question goes, that we are admitting so many students who have not been trained in critical thinking or American approaches to knowledge into the universities? And there are a number of concerns about this. There's concern about hosting Confucius Institutes, which some people in Washington would say are hotbeds of espionage, spies. They are not hotbeds of espionage. I can just tell you this is wrong. There are issues with Confucius Institutes, but spying is not one of them. There's also a large concern about what's called the 1,000 Talents Program. The 1,000 Talents Program is one of 200 programs that China has to try to attract Chinese scholars who've been educated overseas to come back to China, to put their knowledge to work there. Now, again, to be clear, there is nothing nefarious about that. Of course, China has these programs. China would be foolish if it did not try to attract the talent back. This is entirely predictable. And yet the concern is that we are training Chinese scholars in STEM fields in particular, and they go back to China and they build China's power instead of America's power. There's also growing concern about American faculty accepting money from China, especially from corporations like Huawei, which is a sort of a related issue, but a side issue. We can talk about Huawei in Q&A if you want. So concerns about American universities pursuing Chinese funding and Chinese tuition generally. There are also concerns about the large number of delegations that come from China for visits. About what? Well, it's usually not exactly clear, but there are a lot of these delegations that come and they tour labs and they tour facilities, and sometimes thumb drives get inserted into Computers and even these seemingly friendly exchanges can be a source of the loss of American information. There was an important Australian report published late last year called Picking Flowers, Making Honey, which detailed in a great deal of depth and very convincingly the fact that large numbers of Chinese scholars in Australian universities were actually employed by the People's Liberation Army, but came under the auspices of various shell universities or institutions such that their PLA affiliation wasn't known, and so you need to know who you are dealing with. There are also concerns about Chinese students and scholars associations. For the most part, these play extremely positive roles on campus. I've seen this happening so that a new Chinese student is coming here. The Chinese Students and Scholars Association will pick them up at the airport, help them find a place to live, get them oriented, take care of them, show them where the good Chinese restaurants and Asian groceries are, and they throw the Chinese New Year's parties. And this is mostly a very positive thing, and it's part of the diversity of the campus. But in many cases, Chinese Students and Scholars Associations have also been discovered to be in communication with Chinese embassies and consulates in ways that may undermine academic freedom or the freedom of discourse on American campuses. And then lastly, sorry, I need another drink. There's a growing concern about the nature of academia in China. Since Deng Xiaoping took over in 1978, for most of the next 40 years, the story of China was one of gradual opening, gradual liberalization. Everybody has heard about the many human rights issues in China. And the individual human rights problems you hear about are true, and they're serious and concerning. At the same time, and this is underreported in the American media, the rights of individual Chinese have been climbing at an extremely rapid rate over the past 40 years. In fact, I would go so far to say that before Xi Jinping came to power, even with the human rights issues that were still in China, so let's say 2013, while this is still a one-party Leninist authoritarian state, no question, best time in Chinese history to be a Chinese in China. Continued expansion of almost every kind of freedom except the freedom to challenge the Chinese Communist Party's monopoly on power or to organize outside of the auspices of the Communist Party. But freedoms were increasing throughout most of these 40 years, and the material well-being of the Chinese increased on a scale and at a speed that was unprecedented in human history. And for this, we have to say, congratulations, good for you. As a moral matter, this is about human flourishing. But Xi Jinping has been both more aggressive internationally and far more repressive domestically, and has cracked down on the media. He says, 他们都姓党, they're all surnamed Chinese Communist Party, they serve the party. The universities, the think tanks, the creative classes, he's pulled a lot of pieces out of the Maoist playbook, and China really has become far more repressive under his leadership, and this is especially true at the universities. And what this means is that American universities that have long-standing cooperative relations with Chinese universities have in many cases had to reconsider them. And the most famous case is the College of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University, which last year canceled an exchange with People's University of China, Renmin Daxue, which is a very good university in the Chinese system, but it's very, very close to the Communist Party. And the reason that the School of Industrial and Labor Relations canceled this exchange program was because many young Chinese students have been disappeared by the Chinese Communist Party over the past year. And these students who've been disappeared, are they human rights activists? Are they disciples of Liu Xiaobo or Falun Gong? Do they want to commemorate the Tiananmen massacre? No. They are the Marxists on campus who were advocating under the umbrella of Marxist morality for stronger rights of Chinese labor vis-a-vis Chinese management. And they've been closed down and disappeared in Xi Jinping's China. And so Cornell said, just can't play anymore. No exchanges. So the dynamics we're talking about are in part historical and structural. You've got a rising power and a great power. Some of the fears in Washington, yes, are an index about America's fear of its loss of preeminence and America's fear of relative decline. That is part of this story, to be sure. But so is the real increase in repression under Xi Jinping and his creation of a surveillance state, of a kind of a soft totalitarian surveillance state. And one more recent anecdote, I was speaking with the cabinet of a public Research One university last year and was trying to help them understand the kinds of due diligence that they had to exercise with reference to Chinese exchanges. And there was the dean of the School of Behavioral and Social Sciences went back and did a little due diligence on a project that had been proposed by a Chinese entity that was sort of quasi-academic, quasi-corporate, that had come to this university and said, we would like to learn from you. We would like to have an exchange with you on uses of global positioning systems, GPS, and the way that they can be used to anticipate and mitigate natural disasters, especially typhoons, which can be quite destructive in the south of China. So this looked fine until we sort of said, well, look again. And the department then went and looked at open source information about this company and found that this company was deeply involved in the build out of the surveillance state and the re-education camps for Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So in Xi Jinping's China, every Chinese entity, including nominally private enterprises, some think tanks will tell you that they are non-governmental think tanks, they are all subject to the control of the Chinese Communist Party, and increasingly so. You don't have an institutional partner from the PRC of which that is not true. Doesn't mean you can't do anything. There's still a lot of room for cooperation and a lot that we can do, but you have to be aware of that. Okay, so what kinds of things can be done about that at the universities? How much time do we have? 5. Okay, so very quickly, and I'll keep this brief. I think there needs to be far more transparency in universities. Universities, departments, universities as a whole, as well as individual faculty members, should not have any contracts or MOUs with any foreign, not only Chinese, especially Chinese in some senses because China is so large and ambitious, but with any foreign government, entity, or person. All contracts should be public. If a foreign entity wants to have a secret clause of an MOU or contract with an American university, do not do it. Training and orientation. I think it's very important that all American university persons, be they graduates, undergraduates, faculty, or staff, need far better orientations every year to the idea of the American university and to the American university, or UC Boulder's particular standards of academic freedom, academic integrity, and academic rigor, so that everybody understands the terms of free and open debate and respect for diverse opinions. And the reason this comes up, and there have been numerous instances of this, but again, they're merely anecdotal. So I don't mean to tar everybody with the same brush. We're talking about a small minority of cases, but there are, with more Chinese undergraduates on campus and more Chinese students on campus, they've never heard critical discourse about China. And suddenly they are in classrooms where the Tiananmen massacre comes up, and the 1950, what they've always been taught was the liberation of Tibet, is taught as the invasion of Tibet. And then God forbid that the American faculty member should call Taiwan a country. And they object to this. And there have been instances of people pulling down posters for Uyghur speakers, or whatever it might be. And the idea is that all American students born in the United States and foreign need to be oriented to the terms of a free and open and respectful debate. And I think orientation is an important part of this. Very important also, I think, that all faculty members be required to report any affiliation they have outside of their American university job to their departments, that they report any funding they get. A lot of problems have come out of that. And also, and I'll make this the last recommendation in the interest of time, universities need to both partner with American security agencies, with Congress, with the FBI, to help define and understand and manage this problem. At the same time, American universities need to be advocates for openness. The broad issue we have with China's rise is that we've never faced a peer competitor, one like China, which is an ancient, large civilization state, rightly proud of its many accomplishments, which is now the world's leading trading nation. We're also its #1 trading partner, so we're part of that. But that is also trying to spread its practices internationally, primarily through the vector of money. Chinese foreign policy. What is Chinese foreign policy about? Chinese foreign policy seeks a world that is highly integrated. Very sincere about this. A world that is highly integrated and wholly accepting of Chinese Communist Party prerogatives and practices. And that's where the difficulty comes in. But because China is so wealthy, it creates a real dilemma for us. And it's putting pressure on core American values and the institutions founded on those values of a sort that we've never faced before. What do I mean by that? You've got the core American value of security, but you've also got the core American value of openness, the liberal values. The security side of the equation now wants to say, you are training the top minds of our adversary, and you shouldn't be doing that. But the reply from academia, from openness, is equally compelling. It says that American universities are one of the greatest assets we have in our competition with China. We have the world's greatest system of higher education, and that system's greatness is due to its openness. Given the global creation and transmission of knowledge, you cannot wall China off from American knowledge without walling the United States off from the global creation of knowledge. You just can't do it. You can't do it without inflicting tremendous self-harm and actually diminishing the status of American universities as an asset in this competition. So it's a true dilemma. The security concern is very legitimate, but the reply from openness in universities is equally compelling, and it's very hard to know how these will work out. So the universities have to be involved with security to try to reach some kind of compromise or common vocabulary while continuing to advocate strongly for the openness and the internationalization of universities. And I'll close on this because this is one of the biggest pieces that's missing from this discussion. Right now, Washington is still sort of freaking out about this stuff. There's a lot of exaggeration. There's a lot of misframing. We're just beginning to get down to the business of serious policymaking about this. And Washington has described its concerns about China. Those concerns, which are legitimate and serious, are not being weighed against all of the benefits that America has gained over the past 40 years from attracting Chinese talent. I don't know how you quantify this, but having lived in this and worked on this for 33 years, you've got China threat, and then we've got our benefit from the brain drain and from attracting all these wonderful scholars to the United States. And that bit, what Chinese scholars who stayed in America and have become Americans and have contributed to our own national well-being, their contribution is not being weighed against the legitimate security concerns. I think that's a good task for higher education to take on so that we have a more balanced discussion than we've had. This does not go away. There's no silver bullet. And this competition between the United States and China is, I think, largely without precedent and is going to be with us for decades. I hope the universities including UC Boulder, play a major role, have a major voice in getting this right. Thank you.